Hello there, my very good friends. My name is Andy H. Murray, and I'm a complete idiot because in February 2018, I said this about Hangman Adam Page.
This guy is a double serving of unbuttered toast washed down by a glass of room temperature tap water. Fine in a pinch, but dull. So dull.
Yep, that's aged about as well as 75% of the Attitude Era. But if you can't take the piss out of yourself, you can't take the piss out of anyone else, right? I'm Andy from What Culture, and here are some hot takes so bad they'll melt your wrestling brain. Number 10, me on Hangman Page. You've already heard the quote, and I think it kind of speaks for itself, really. But since embarking on this wonderful career in wrestling media, it stands as one of the least sage things I've ever said, and think of the ground that covers. Hangman Page has risen to incredible heights since 2018, ostensibly becoming the main character of AEW through his long-term rise to the top, culminating in becoming world champion at Full Gear 2021. He is a wonderful professional wrestler with a devoted fan base who identify with the anxious millennial cowboy more than any other. In this day and age, the toast is very much buttered. The tap water isn't even lukewarm anymore, it's boiling hot. That's a terrible analogy. Who the hell would want to drink that? Anyway, next. Number 9, Al Snow on Hardcore Wrestling. In recent years, Al Snow has reinvented himself in many ways, one of which is as a talking head and hot take merchant specializing in spicy cornet adjacent back in my day-isms. Like Jim, sometimes he's right, but when he's wrong, he's very wrong. In The Wrestlers, the recent Netflix series focusing on Snow's Ohio Valley wrestling promotion, Snow was asked, "What is a deathmatch?" To which Al responded, "Something flubbin' stupid," which is pretty wild considering the sheer volume of hardcore and similarly violent matches that helped make the man in the first place. This is the same bloke who once said that Hogan vs. Andre, not Savage vs. Steamboat, was the best match on WrestleMania 3 because it sold the most tickets, which is silly because quality is entirely subjective. You cannot measure it. By that logic, the original Avatar is the greatest movie of all time because it had the highest box office in history and oh my god, no. Just no. Number 8, Mike Quackenbush on Orange Cassidy. Nobody in wrestling history has ever been able to balance comedy and an outlandish persona with actual wrestling without violating the core psychology that governs the sport quite like Orange Cassidy. But in the eyes of disgraced Chikara founder Mike Quackenbush, Cassidy was better as an ant. Before he became Orange Cassidy, freshly squeezed was Fire Ant in the cult Chikara promotion and the stable, The Colony. In a leaked email from years and years ago, Quackenbush claimed, and I quote, "He still does Orange Cassidy here and there, but he gets 5 or 6 times the volume of requests with Fire Ant. That character resonates with people. It's clear, easily defined, easy to market. You don't even want to know the difference in merch numbers from Orange Cassidy to Fire Ant." And to be fair, that final part of the quote might be true in 2023, just the other way around. Not to discredit the Colony or anything, but just like my dumbass take on Hangman Page, this dumbass take has aged like milk. Number 7, Dogg on Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. Becky Lynch turned on Charlotte Flair at SummerSlam 2018, kickstarting her entire movement as the man before finally pushing her towards mega stardom. There was a real disconnect between WWE and the audience, however. While WWE was somehow trying to turn Lynch heel in this moment, the fans cheered her like a hero, and so it transpired. Dogg, who isn't exactly a merchant of good takes at the best of times, said the following on a recent episode of his podcast. "The idea was that Charlotte came in and weaseled her way and won the title and kind of stole it from Becky. Oh my god, what are you doing? That's horrible sportsmanship. There's no goodness left at all. It's all Twitter. The world is Twitter. The world is Twitter now." So in saying this, he acknowledged that Charlotte weaseled her way into the title match, effectively stealing her opportunity from Becky, and then chastised the fans for cheering Becky, who was entirely justified in what she did. This from the same guy who once famously quipped that wins and losses don't matter, which actually, accidentally, summed up a lot of problems that people had with WWE at the time. Number 6, Eric Bischoff on AEW. AEW has taken a bit of a hit in recent years, I think it's fair to say, but in 2021, when Eric Bischoff tried to bury the company's ability to weave compelling wrestling yarns, it couldn't have been any further from the truth. This was the year, of course, of Hangman Page's long-term payoff, dethroning Kenny Omega, and came at a time when the rankings-driven narrative framework added stakes and an inbuilt story to pretty much everything. Bischoff ended up backpedaling when Tony Khan pointed out correctly that Eric's WCW often promoted cold random matches even in its heyday, and Eric ended up up moving the goalposts by saying, "If I've ever given the impression that I thought that every match on Nitro had a storyline, forgive me now. It's really about your top matches that don't have sufficient story or structure, or at least a compelling one." It remains the laziest, easy to fall for take in the business, and one that AEW critics reach for when they haven't got anything of actual insight to say. It's frankly quite boring, and we've now got years and years of evidence to counter it. Number 5, Vince Russo on foreign wrestling. You know we couldn't get through this list without mentioning booking's ultimate one-trick pony at least once, so here he is, offering some impossibly dumb takes on Japanese and Mexican wrestling. In an old in-character interview with Mike Tenay, Russo once quipped that if you want lucha libres, go to Japan, which, what? But if that was in character, this certainly wasn't the case in 1999 when he said, "You will never, ever, ever, ever see the Japanese wrestlers or the Mexican wrestlers over in American mainstream wrestling," which, considering that AEW and New Japan's Forbidden Door pay-per-views absolutely slaughter the buys of every single Russo TNA pay-per-view, that's just pretty funny. Number 4, Bully Ray on Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega attracts a lot of bad takes, including this gem from Bully Ray on Busted Open Radio in 2021. Let me ask the AEW fans this: do you really care about Kenny Omega, or do you just care about the one-winged angel and his V-triggers? Which is a particularly mental thing to ask AEW fans of all people, given that Kenny Omega is in the Elite, and it was in the Elite's image and surge to global prominence that allowed the company to exist in the first place. It's kind of like asking WWE fans if they cared about Hulk Hogan back in the day. That's not to say that Kenny is immune to criticism, but it's pretty clear that yes, AEW fans do care about him. If they didn't, the company wouldn't exist. Number 3, Disco Inferno on the Wednesday Night Wars. Disco Inferno is wrong about a good many things. Most of the stuff that comes out of his mouth, in fact. So narrowing it down for this list was very difficult. But here's just a little dribble of his piss. In July 2020, Disco tweeted proudly about predicting that NXT was turning the tide against AEW in the Wednesday Night Wars, and he was very chuffed with himself. Well, we all know how that one went. NXT was so soundly hammered during the Wednesday Night Wars, defeating Dynamite just once in the key 18 to 49 demographic, that it eventually moved over to Tuesdays because it was getting pounded so hard. If the Wars were full-time again in this day and age, then maybe the story would be different. NXT's pretty hot now. But that wasn't the case when it actually happened, and Disco, as he often is, was rather wrong. Number 2, Steve Austin and Paul Heyman on Cody Rhodes. This one is proof that even the greatest aren't infallible. Triple H made a great point not so long ago, pointing out that WWE could be telling the current Roman Reigns saga without him holding 2 world titles at once, although it's kind of one world title now, but you get the point. Paul Heyman and Steve Austin, well, they disagree. When it comes to Cody Rhodes finishing the story and potentially defeating Roman at WrestleMania 39, where he lost, Heyman has posited that if Cody won, there'd be nowhere for him to go, which is wild. He could have, maybe had one of the best babyface title runs ever after ending one of the best heel runs ever, kickstarted by the ultimate WrestleMania moment. I don't really think that qualifies as nothing somehow. Austin, meanwhile, said it would have been cliche for Cody to dethrone Roman in a storybook ending, which is quite ironic given that Steve himself wasn't exactly volunteering to stare at the lights for Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14. And at number 1, Bruce Pritchard on Triple H versus Booker T. Triple H telling Booker T that, and I quote, "People like you don't deserve it," referring to becoming world champion, and its awful, oppressive overtones is widely regarded amongst the most shameful things that WWE has ever done in this millennium. That Booker T didn't even win the WrestleMania match after a feud that saw him derided as somebody that Triple H said was there to entertain people like him made it even worse, and you'd think it would be indefensible, but not to Bruce Pritchard. On Something to Wrestle With, his podcast, Pritchard once claimed that the idea wasn't to book a guy exploiting racist overtones in his language to win, but to instead prove that ex-WCW guys were not on Triple H's level, which is rather unconvincing to say the least, given that Triple H wasn't throwing dollars at Scott Steiner or Goldberg or telling them that they were only in WWE to dance for him while burying them in those feuds. It really is indefensible, and yet Bruce is in WWE, he's on creative, you don't expect him to slaughter these things, but come on, at least make it believable. And hey, there we go, the ultimate bad take to end the video on. I've been Andy, and I'll see you later.